Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're doing something really cool. We are taking an exclusive, over-the-shoulder look at exactly how an art director guides a premium campaign launch in 2026. We're going to break down how modern campaigns engineer trust, bypass audience fatigue, and hit the exact psychological triggers needed to actually drive real behavior. We aren't just looking at pretty pictures here. We are reverse engineering the intersection of cognitive science, visual design, and generational culture.
Okay, let's dive into this. 4,000 to 10,000. That is the jarring number of advertisements an average consumer is exposed to every single day across all their screens. Honestly, that's likely more ads than the number of steps you take in a day. When you're looking at a number that massive, the realization hits hard. Your competition isn't other brands anymore. No, your competition is the human brain. To win, an art director absolutely must understand that attention, memory, and trust are incredibly scarce resources.
So let's start with Act 1, the brief, which is really all about the mind. Before a single sketch is even drawn, we've got to map the consumer's mind. To understand the why behind their behavior, we look to Daniel Kahneman's concept of System 1 thinking. Basically, System 1 is our fast, intuitive, and highly emotional cognitive processing. Now, as marketers, it's super tempting to target a consumer's logical brain with specs and features, right? But the reality is that System 1 drives much of our real-world behavior. If you don't understand why someone acts, just knowing who they are is completely useless. The data actually shows that emotionally connected customers are more than twice as valuable as highly satisfied ones. Emotion outperforms logic literally every time. So, how exactly do we trigger this System 1? Well, by pulling these 5 cognitive levers. We don't just blast a blunt, one-size-fits-all demographic message out there. We apply these levers through behavioral segmentation. Notice how we use data to identify if a segment needs urgency cues for decision-making, or, maybe they need social proof to build trust. We're tailoring the choice architecture to match their specific psychological motivations. Moving right along to Act 2, the audience, or as an art director thinks of it, the eyes. All right. Once we understand the mind, we've got to understand the eyes. A master art director knows that visual language is absolutely not universal. If you don't understand the specific aesthetic codes of your target generation, you're basically speaking a language they simply cannot hear. Let's contrast our 2 primary premium audiences. Millennials. They grew up transitioning from analog to digital. They value what we call craftsmanship legibility, meaning they want to see the investment in the production, the polished narrative depth, and aspirational realism. Gen Z, on the flip side, is entirely digitally native. For them, hyper-polish actually feels fake. They value anti-polish as a signal of absolute authenticity. They demand immediate emotional legibility and deep cultural fluency. If a brand superficially appropriates a Gen Z subculture, there's no way around it. It immediately destroys trust. And get this? The window you have to communicate that cultural fluency is staggeringly small, 200 milliseconds, literally the blink of an eye. That is the exact threshold an art director has to communicate an image's emotional register to a Gen Z consumer before they just scroll past. If the atmosphere and emotion of the image aren't instantly clear, the campaign is pretty much dead on arrival. Which brings us to Act 3, the toolkit. Let's talk about the composition. And this brilliantly illustrates how we guarantee an image registers in that tiny 200 millisecond window. We use the psychological mechanics of visual design, specifically Gestalt principles, to actively guide the eye and trigger those fast System 1 emotions. Look at the principle of proximity in these 2 images of children in Bolivia. In the first one, the physical closeness of the subjects tells our brain they belong together. We instantly perceive an emotional relationship and comfort. But in the second image, just by moving them apart, the narrative entirely changes. We now see them as distinct individuals with their own separate identities. Literally, just by shifting proximity, the art director completely rewrites the emotional story. Next up is the principle of closure. Our brains are hardwired to naturally fill in visual gaps. Notice how the pole interrupts the line of the wall, yet our mind perceives a continuous shape. For an art director, this is basically a superpower. It means you don't have to show every single detail. You can communicate a massive emotional atmosphere with minimalistic, broken, or suggested shapes, trusting the viewer's brain to complete that premium narrative for you. But here's where things get tricky. Act 4, the trap, also known as AI fatigue. Because look, even the absolute best composition can be totally derailed by a modern campaign killer,
AI aesthetic fatigue. Because audiences have been exposed to such massive volumes of AI-generated commercial imagery over the last few years, there's been a total audience rejection of sterile, CGI-perfect, hyper-clean imagery. The flawless, overlit visuals of past luxury advertising, they no longer trigger a premium perception. Instead, they instantly trigger skepticism.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the specific triggers that actually cause this fatigue. Audiences immediately spot hyper-smooth surfaces with no microtexture or lighting that has no motivated source in the scene. They totally catch atmospheric haze that looks pasted on rather than genuinely environmental. So to maintain a premium brand perception today, an art director must heavily mandate tactile realism, controlled imperfection, and absolute technical precision in every single asset.
All right, Act 5, the launch. Let's head into the convergence zone.
Let's move to and see how this builds into an actual strategy. How do we take the cognitive levers and visual values to bypass AI fatigue? We find the convergence zone. To hit both generations effectively, an art director follows this launch checklist. First, establish quiet luxury. Think dark palettes, negative space, and compositional restraint over loud, flashy gold accents. Second, build cinematic depth. Borrow from film with directional lighting and narrative implication. Third, ensure tactile authenticity by featuring natural, organic materials like real stone or leather. And finally, you absolutely must design platform natively.
And that last point, platform-native intelligence, directly ties back to our behavioral segmentation. You have to reach the audience where they actually live, speaking the exact dialect of that platform. Instagram still demands high production value. TikTok demands authentic energy and speed. Pinterest requires visual aspiration. And if you're posting to stories or reels, it must be natively designed for a 9:16 vertical format. If an art director just adapts a horizontal TV spot for TikTok, yeah, the audience knows immediately and the campaign completely fails. Ultimately, the whole shebang boils down to this one core philosophy. Authenticity of aesthetic commitment matters more than following current visual fashion. In 2026, trust isn't built on fleeting trends or, sterile perfection. It is built on genuine subcultural literacy. It's built on a deep psychological resonance that proves to the consumer that you actually understand the world they live in.
So what does this all mean for you? Well, you have all the tools, you understand the cognitive levers, the Gestalt composition principles, and the exact visual values of your generational targets. The brain is the battleground, and the clock is definitely ticking. So how will your next campaign navigate the 200 millisecond threshold of consumer trust? I'll leave you to think about that. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep creating.